What is up, y'all? Welcome on back. The question is not who is the best James Bond, because let's be honest here, Daniel Craig is without a doubt the best James Bond, and it's not even close, I'm afraid to say. But the real question that we have today, and I'm going to answer it in this video, is which is the best Daniel Craig James Bond movie? So today I'm going to be ranking all 5 of his movies from quote unquote worst to best. So if you have different opinions or whatever your rankings are, drop a comment down below. Let me know what is Daniel Craig's best James Bond movie. What is the worst? But without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into this. At number 5, I think it's safe to say that majority of James Bond fans out there will say that this movie is without a doubt the worst Daniel Craig James Bond movie, and that is Quantum of Solace. I think there is some fun to be had with this movie, but this is a bare bones type of movie. It was heavily affected by the writer's strike at the time, and it completely shows throughout this entire movie. The action sequences are easily the worst of the Daniel Craig era. They're super quick, chaotic cuts that really makes everything hard to follow. And to be fair, the villain is really lackluster, maybe the least interesting villain of the entire series. But Daniel Craig is still Daniel Craig. The locations are fantastic. Really love the whole revenge theme of the movie and how it ties into Casino Royale. But overall, this movie is just not that good. I can still watch it now and get some type of enjoyment out of it, but it is easily the worst movie of the Daniel Craig James Bond era. For everything that this movie does right, there's 2 or 3 things that it does absolutely terrible. And that's why it is at number 5. At number 4, Spectre. I will stand on a hill and die on it that Spectre, if you watch 2/3 of this movie, it is some of the best James Bond stuff that I have seen. And it's some of the best James Bond stuff from Daniel Craig specifically. 2/3 of this movie is really fucking good. It's right up until the moment that Blofeld gets his big reveal at the Moroccan base. Christoph Waltz seemed like the absolute perfect casting for not only a James Bond villain, but Blofeld? I mean, come on. He should have been the perfect villain of this Daniel Craig era, and it was the best casting. I remember when it got announced that he would be joining the series, the franchise, and we were all super ecstatic about it. And I don't know, I haven't really talked to other James Bond fans out there, but personally, I am not, and I repeat this, I am not a fan of his interpretation of Blofeld and his story in this series. I don't care for his take on Blofeld whatsoever. He just edges out just barely Dominic Green to not be the worst villain in this entire era of James Bond movies. Christoph Waltz is definitely the worst part of this movie with his flat performance that was not helped whatsoever by the script. But with that being said, the action sequences overall are really great. It does feel like at certain times Skyfall 2.0. And if you liked Skyfall, then you're probably going to like the aspects of this that feels like Skyfall. If you didn't like Skyfall, then most likely you're not going to enjoy this one either. And I don't see that necessarily as a complaint, though. I think it struggles to separate itself from Skyfall in a way because it's so similar in tone and look and some of the same themes that are going on throughout this movie. But overall, I think, again, it's still a great experience. I love that opening long take with Bond walking with the female at the Day of the Dead fest and then just ditching her to walk across the rooftops. I enjoyed the introduction of Madeline Swan here. There was some good chemistry between her and Daniel Craig. Dave Bautista also has a pretty good performance here, even though we didn't really get much of him. And Ralph Fiennes as M, just great as always. Just a perfect casting. I really love him as an actor. And then I thought he brought a lot to the table as that character, especially the conflict between him and James throughout, well, the rest of the series, but this movie specifically. If the last third of this movie was cut or just changed a bit, you could argue this movie would be higher on my list for sure. But Blofeld just absolutely kills it for me. The second that he shows up, it's like the movie just dives completely. The whole brother thing just felt thrown in there and not really fleshed out. But again, overall, this is still an enjoyable Bond experience for me. And at number 3, it is the last movie of the series, and that is No Time to Die. I, again, will stand on a hill and die that this is easily the most underrated movie out of the 5 Daniel Craig movies that we got. I do think the ending can be a bit much at times, but overall, this was a great movie and a fun experience that definitely hit me in the feels with Bond's death. I'm all on board with him retiring with Swan, but then that lasted like 5 minutes of the movie, the very beginning of the movie, which the whole sequence from him going to the burial site of Vesper, getting blown up by Blofeld, and then him thinking that Swan had something to do with it, him ditching her. Really great action choreography there and throughout the rest of the movie for sure. I just wish we would have gotten more between Swan and Bond at the very beginning of this movie, or even just more so sprinkled throughout the movie. We just got little tidbits here and there. And then when it came time for her to join the mix again towards the back end of the movie, it just felt it felt like everything was rushed. And honestly, that's my biggest complaint of No Time to Die. Other than like the super dramatic ending with the British Navy unleashing like a shit ton of missiles to destroy Safin's poison base, I just wish they would have written the Bond Swan stuff a little bit better. It just felt like the whole conflict between them was solved rather quickly. And speaking of Safin, I thought he was a good overall villain. Is he the best of the series? No, he's better than Blofeld, and he's definitely better than Dominic Green. So he's right there at number 3, honestly, in terms of villains. Rami Malek's take on Safin in this movie is the way to go if you want that calm, menacing villain, not whatever Christopher Waltz did. But the whole poison thing, though, that was a little much for me. It's like they needed a reason to kill Bond at the very end of the movie. And they just came up with this whole, well, he doesn't want to live without her, so we're going to have to give him a reason to be separated from her and just end his life. It just seemed a little lame to me. But some of the positives of the movie, okay? I've been shit talking it for a minute. How could I forget about how incredible the Cuba setting was and Ana de Armas and her fantastic performance there? I remember her showing up on screen and everybody being blown away by her performance and her character. I would totally watch a movie with just her character as like the main character in a James Bond spinoff. They would never fucking do it, but I would be there for it. Now, we technically kind of got something similar with Ballerina, but very different character personalities there, so it doesn't count. But overall, great performances and action sequences that effectively close out one of the best runs in a franchise. Which brings me to number 2. Casino Royale is my number 2 movie of the Daniel Craig James Bond era. This is where it all started. This might be the number 1 movie in my rankings 10 minutes from now. I flip-flop constantly between this one and obviously the number 1. If you told me that, oh yeah, there's no way that it's without a doubt, Casino Royale is the best, not only the best Daniel Craig James Bond movie, but it is the best James Bond movie ever. I couldn't argue with you at all. This reshaped not only how I feel about James Bond movies, but how the world views this franchise. I remember working at the movie theater when this movie originally came out and sticking around at the very beginning of the movie and watching so many times the parkour chase sequence or even like the airport sequence among all the other great action set pieces in this movie and just being mesmerized by it. Like this was one of the best movies of the year that year for sure. And this one completely changed how everyone viewed James Bond. This was a movie that gave his character depth and made him a more complex 3D character. He wasn't just some guy that went from action set piece to action set piece and slept with a woman, and that was the end. He actually had a love interest at the very end. And then when she betrayed him, he felt that hurt. And we actually had a really great story with Casino Royale. And speaking of which, I really enjoyed that relationship with Vesper. I thought it was a great change of pace for the James Bond franchise to bring in a love interest and then carry that thread throughout multiple movies. The story is absolutely fantastic. And who knew that a poker game could be hella tense? There is so much tension throughout every single scene of this movie that you're just always sitting on the edge of your seat. And then let's not forget, arguably the best and most unique villain in the series, Le Chiffre. Mads Mikkelsen had a phenomenal performance as Le Chiffre, and all that put together makes this one of the best James Bond movies ever. And as of right now, it is number 2 on my Daniel Craig rankings. Well, there can only be one. Again, if you said Casino Royale was the best of the series, I wouldn't argue with you. But my number 1 Daniel Craig James Bond movie, as it stands right now, is Skyfall. Now, funny story about this, okay? But I just about fell asleep watching this movie in theaters. I remember watching it for the first time and thinking, I mean, it's good. Not my kind of thing. And with every watch through of this movie, I love it more and more. But the reasons I put Skyfall above Casino Royale, we get a nice change of pace, although they would kind of redo this in like the next movie and the movie after that. But to have Bond shot, thrown off of a bridge, and feared dead, for him to come back and not be the agent that he used to be was a great way to separate this movie from all of the others that came before. And to me, honestly, you could put Le Chiffre or Silva right there at number 1 and number 2. For me personally, Silva is the best villain of the Daniel Craig era. But what's really crazy to think about is Javier Bardem has 2 of the best villain performances of all time with Silva and Sugar from No Country for Old Men. But I love the character of Silva. The whole interrogation scene with him and Bond. He's like walking up from the elevator to Bond. It's like a long take sequence, and then him sitting there and interrogating or talking to Bond, and him putting his hand on Bond's leg and him saying, "What makes you think this is my first time?" The sexual tension in that scene, I was not ready for, but I'm all there for it. Like, that was a great sequence altogether. And again, it separates this movie from everything else. Everything that we got in this movie just felt different in comparison to not only the movies that came before it, but the movies that came after it. Everything just felt like a little bit of a cheap imitation once we moved to Spectre and No Time to Die. Silva just had this, like, the Dark Knight Joker vibe to him where he was always one step ahead of Bond. And then on top of that, you also have M finally getting her roses as a character, and she's getting some great quality time on screen. Quality time that actually mattered. We actually dive into her history a little bit and made her the emotional core of this movie. Now, to me, this is just the best parts of Bond all woven together for a just about perfect movie. I think I ended up giving it like 4.5 stars. This is, to me, as close to a perfect James Bond movie as we're ever going to get. I would be surprised if anything ever steps over Casino Royale and Skyfall. Again, you could make the case for either one being at number 1. But as of right now, after watching all the movies back to back to back, I gotta stick with Skyfall. That movie just has some of the most memorable set pieces and character moments of the series. And then Casino Royale is right behind it. But guys, what did you think about my rankings? What is your favorite Daniel Craig James Bond movie? Is it Skyfall? Is it Casino Royale? If you say another James Bond movie, I'm interested in hearing your take if you have a different James Bond movie as number one for Daniel Craig. So let me know down below what your rankings are of the Daniel Craig era for James Bond. But guys, that's going to be it for me. I will catch y'all next time on another one. Laters.